Welcome back. In this lab, we will get some hands-on with the S3 service. Let's get started by going to our favorite place, the main console, where we can go to our S3 service. As you can see, we still have the bucket we created from an earlier video. We can go ahead and create another. I'll click on Create Bucket. In this new window, we will see the general configuration for our S3 bucket. Now, remember in the last video, I stated that our bucket name is like a domain name. It must be unique. But let's try and see if we can create another bucket with the same name of ZTM-lab. I'll type ZTM-lab and scroll all the way down and click on Create Bucket. As you can see, S3 just gave us an error stating that the bucket name already exists. So I will simply add a -2 at the end and this should be fine. Now we can select our AWS region. And as you can see, there are several AWS regions for us to choose from. Also remember in the last video that I stated we should create a bucket depending on how close it is to our end users for latency reasons. But since I already have a bucket in the North Virginia region, I will choose the North California region as my AWS region. I also want to point out that if we wanted to simply copy the same settings as our other bucket, we could click on Choose Bucket. And this would copy the configuration of our other bucket, but we won't do that in this lab. Under Object Ownership, we can choose to control who owns the data in the bucket, depending on who uploads the objects to the bucket, and to use only ACLs to control the access to the data. I will go ahead and choose the ACLs enabled option. By default, block all public access is turned on. And this means that our S3 bucket is secure because no one outside of our AWS account can access our bucket. We will leave this turned on. We also have versioning, and as you can see, the bucket versioning is turned off by default. If we turned on versioning at the bucket level, it would keep multiple versions of every object stored in this bucket, but I will leave this off. We can also add tags, and this helps us keep track of storage costs. So we could add tag names like finance or development, and it would help us see who is spending money in our AWS account, but we won't add any. We can also enable encryption, and this would automatically encrypt any new object that is added to the bucket. If we click on the Advanced Settings dropdown, we can see the Object Lock option. This would allow an object to be permanently locked within our bucket, and this also requires versioning to be turned on. So we would have to go back and enable versioning for this to work. But since we don't have a need for that in this lab, we can leave it off. We can go ahead and select Create Bucket. Now that our bucket has been created, we can go ahead and click on it. In the new window, we are first presented with our Objects tab. We also have the Properties, Permissions, Metrics, Management, and Access Points tab here at the top. Let's go ahead and click on the Permissions tab. In the bucket overview, we can see information about our bucket like region, the ARN, and the creation date. If we scroll down a bit, we can see the status of the bucket versioning and the option to add MFA delete to our bucket. If we keep scrolling, we will see any tags related to our bucket and the encryption status of our bucket. If we keep scrolling, we will even see more settings like intelligent tiering, which helps us cost optimize our storage costs based on how frequently our objects get accessed, and server access logging. As you can see, there's a lot we can configure on our bucket, but for this lab, we won't configure anything in this tab. We can go back to the top and click on the Permissions tab. The very first thing we see in the permissions overview is that objects in the bucket are not public. Let's change that. If we scroll down a bit under Block Public Access, we can click on the Edit button. Note that this setting is recommended by AWS to stay on, but we can go ahead and turn it off. If we click on the Block All Public Access, these other settings are no longer grayed out. We can click on Save Changes and then type Confirm to confirm we want to turn this feature off. After the screen refreshes, we can see in the permissions overview that it says objects can now be public. If we keep scrolling down, we see the bucket policy, and just like in IAM, these policies are written in JSON. We can also see the cross-origin resource sharing, which is also written in JSON. If we scroll back to the top, we can click on the Metrics tab. In this tab, we can see information about the bucket, like bucket size, number of objects in the bucket, storage patterns, and replication metrics. We can go back to the top and click on the Management tab. Here, we can configure lifecycle rules, replication rules, and inventory configurations. Lifecycle rules handle how the objects live in our bucket during their lifespan. So for example, you could configure a rule that automatically archives objects after 30 days, or a lifecycle rule that moves objects that are not frequently accessed to another S3 class, like S3 infrequent storage or S3IA. These help reduce storage cost. We can use replication rules to automatically replicate objects to another S3 bucket in another region for redundancy or to provide better latency access to our users. These two come up frequently on AWS exams. And then we have S3 inventory, which produces a comma-separated value or a CSV file that outputs a list of objects along with their metadata on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis for audits or tracking purposes. This one isn't as common, but it's good to know. We can go back to the top and click on Access Points. This doesn't really come up on the exam, but I just want to quickly cover that access points are used to share data sets where data is aggregated and accessed by different services, application, or teams for things like analytics or other data lake use cases. Now let's go back to the Objects tab. Here we can either click on the Upload button or just drop in our file directly. I will drop in a PNG file. In the new upload window, we can see what is being uploaded and the size of the file. We can also see things like the destination details, which tell us whether we have versioning, encryption, or object locks turned on at the bucket level. Under permissions, we can choose things like the ACLs we can define on our object. Under properties, we can see the storage class. By default, the S3 standard tier is chosen, but we can choose another S3 class if we would like. We could also choose to encrypt the file with a specific encryption key, and we could add tags and metadata, but I will leave everything as it is and click on Upload. After our object is done uploading, we can click on the Close button. We should now see our object in the bucket. Let's click on our object name, and in the window, we should see three tabs, which are Properties, Permissions, and Versions. In the Object Overview window, we should see an object URL. Let's go ahead and copy the URL. If I open a new private browsing window and paste in the URL, what do you think will happen? Let's find out. Oh, it looks like we got an access denied statement. Why do you think that is? Let's close the private window and go back to our object. If we click on the Permissions tab within our object, we can click on the Edit button. In the new window, let's select this read option, which provides read public access to anyone with the URL. Let's scroll down and confirm that we understand the effects, and scroll down and save the changes. Let's open up a new private window and paste the URL again and see what happens. As you can see, we can now see our image. Pretty cool, right? I mean, we can access our object from the internet. I hope you feel more comfortable with S3 buckets and their configuration. I'll see you in the next video.